Ryan Evans with Leadership Lincoln. And today we are interviewing Doug Evans, my father, who agreed to be my experiment as we start a new series where at the beginning of each week, we're going to talk with Lincoln leaders and learn their thoughts about leadership. So tell us a little bit about you, Doug.
Well, my name is Doug Evans. I went to Northeast and Nebraska Wesleyan. In 1975, I started my business with a partner, Barb Derrick, Research Associates, which did market research, public opinion polling, and political consulting. And I've been privileged in that I have been surrounded by incredible leaders. If you looked up geek and nerd in the dictionary, you would find a picture of me. I've always been a geek and a nerd. And luckily in 8th grade, I wound up playing in a Dixieland band with a bunch of guys who became the school leaders. One of them, Brad Paulson, guy who played bass, he was always president of our class. When he was in 9th grade and when he was a senior, he was president of the student body. When he went to Wesleyan, he was president of the student body at Wesleyan. He was a leader. So I've always been able to observe what good leadership is. And I would start off by sharing a saying that another one of my friends, Neil Claiborne, and I always believe in giving people credit. So if I remember their name and I get an idea from somebody, I always try to say their name because I think that's important that people get credit. Anyway, on his Facebook page, he has something that goes like, winners, when they get to the top of the mountain, celebrate. When leaders get to the top of the mountain, they help other people up. And Brad taught me perhaps my most important lesson in 8th grade. We were walking down the hallway. This is a very bad story about me, by the way, but it's a great story about Brad. We were walking down the hallway at Northeast, and there was a Latvian refugee kid. High water pants, pocket protector, brown shoes, the whole 9 yards. And he said, hi. And I did what any usual 8th grade kid would do, and I cut him dead. And Brad said, hi, and said his name, and we stopped and talked to him. And after we went on, I said, Brad, why did you do that? And Brad said, he counts as much as anybody else. And that was Brad. And I think that's part of what makes a great leader. I think that if you look at truly great leaders throughout history, they all have one thing in common. Truly great leaders are servants. That's what they are. That's what the king is. The king in a country is a servant of the people. And I think a lot of people forget that, but that's where it starts with service. And Brad taught me that in 8th grade. So there's my beginning.
So as you've gone forward, having a vision for your community or your business or your organization, I think is part of leadership as well. What was your vision for Lincoln as you entered into, positions of responsibility through your career, and what is your vision for Lincoln in the future?
Well, I've never thought of myself as a leader because I've always thought of myself as a geek or a nerd. I'm a gamer, for crying out loud. Dungeons and Dragons, for crying out loud. I mean, what kind of a person is a leader that does that stuff? And and so I've never thought of myself as a leader, but other people saw things in me and pushed me forward. So I wound up on a lot of boards. I think everybody's first mentor is probably their parents. And certainly my dad was my first mentor, and anything I ever wanted to be was to be just like him. Never made it, but that's what I wanted to be. By the way, how long are we doing this for?
Till 12:30.
Okay.
We got plenty of time.
All right. Keep track. Anyway, then my second mentor was a guy named Vance Rogers, who was president of Nebraska Wesleyan. Because when I was growing up, I wanted to be president of a small college like that. And he taught me a lot about leadership. And whoa,
Oh, we lost your video.
I know, I don't know why. There, we back?
Yep.
All right. Anyway, it said I have low battery, but I've got it plugged in, so I hope it hangs on. Anyway, then early on, my heroes were a couple, Sam and Patsy Davidson. And I would go to the Playhouse, and there would be Sam and Patsy Davidson's name on the list of benefactors. I'd go to the Symphony, and there'd be Sam and Patsy Davidson. And they were president of the Playhouse board and president of the Symphony board. And then Leon's had a football team. So anything that was involved in Lincoln, it was always Sam and Patsy Davidson. And I swear to goodness, when I was in high school, I decided that when I grew up, I wanted to be Sam and Patsy Davidson. And that was to make Lincoln a better place. Now, it used to be that when you were promoted from 8th grade in Lincoln, you had to memorize and give what's called the Athenian Oath. And the Cliff's Notes version of the Athenian Oath is that you'll leave the place better than you found it. And that's certainly what Sam and Patsy Davidson did. And Sam and Patsy got me on my first board, which was the Playhouse board. And from there, I got on the zoo board and other boards. And in each case, what you tried to do was to make it better, to not screw it up. And eventually mostly when politicians say, folks came to me and asked me to run for office, that's bullshit. That's not true. But in my case, it was true. 3 or 4 people came and asked me to run for the school board because they felt that the school board was moving too slow and that I was a big enough jerk that I would make it faster. So I ran for the school board and I got elected to the school board. And I served on the school board for almost 20 years. I served as president a bunch of times. And I think what I brought to that was an attempt to do things right. What people often came to our business to hire us for was we thought outside the box. Phil Sco, one time when I was trying to get something done, Phil said, you like old movies, don't you, Doug? And I said, yeah, I do. And he said, well, you know how in old movies, when it gets hot in the summertime, they go up on the roof? And people always stayed on their own roof. They didn't go to another roof. And he said, you are always asking people to go to another roof. And he said, what's worse is it's bad enough if all you have to do is step over to the other roof. But sometimes you have to jump 3 feet to another roof. Doug, you ask people to jump without even being able to see the other roof. And I think that's true. I've always felt that there's a vision for how you want to do things right. So for instance, one of the things that I did is my mom was a teacher. My wife was a teacher, your mom. And, your mom asked me one time, what is the most important thing for an elementary school teacher? And I went, I don't know, teach math, teach reading. She said, no, it's having a huge bladder because they can never go to the bathroom, So we could never get the contract that I thought was the right contract for teachers. Eventually, what we did, the board passed a contract, which became known as Plan B, that was not negotiated by the LEA, but it was the way things should be, I thought. And the reason they called it Plan B was because the teachers didn't trust it. And so they were only going to offer it for 1 year. But in the end, very few people signed up because they thought it was a trick. But when they saw it wasn't a trick, then everybody wanted in. So it became the contract. And basically the contract is just the kind of contract that everybody else has always had, We say that teachers aren't supposed to teach behavior. They're supposed to teach subject matter, but they serve as models. And so, for instance, when I was teaching one time, and I started off as a teacher, I wanted to go to an auction. And so I called in sick. Unfortunately, my principal was at the auction too, and I got caught. But, you shouldn't have to call in sick. You should be able to go to the auction, for crying out loud. And so this contract allows you to do that, and a whole bunch of other things that are just the kinds of things that everybody else takes for granted. And I was lucky in that I had another mentor, a woman named Kathy Petch, and she hates for me to talk about her being my mentor, but she was my last person that taught me how to be a leader. And basically, she taught me that you want to be inclusive. And you don't become a leader by being exclusive and cutting people out. You become a leader by what I said in the beginning, being a servant and including as many people as you can. And, power is like love. There isn't a finite amount. There's an infinite amount. And so, it's not like you have to hoard your power so that somebody else doesn't get it from you. The more you use it, the more it's there for other people to use. And that was a lesson I learned from her. So I don't know, I'm rambling now. I'll stop.
Well, I mean, you kind of it's interesting though. So you talk about you kind of getting started into some of your service on boards and then running for office. Running for office is a pretty intimidating thing, especially now that people aren't very nice to candidates. What was your experience, winning and losing, and what would you say about that kind of leadership versus serving on a board?
Well, first of all, you can't expect it to be fair. When I ran for board the first time, I ran against an incumbent, and the person who was in charge of politics for the Lincoln Education Association was on the incumbent's team and didn't want me to be on the board. And so when we went in for interviews, and this is according to other people who were there, I got the nod, and they were going to give me the endorsement. LEA was, and then he negotiated it down to where they would co-endorse it. But when he turned it in that they endorsed the other people. That's just cheating. It's what people do because people want power and they're greedy to hold on to what little bit of power they have. Like I said, they don't share it. So if you're going to run for anything, then you better expect that it's not going to be pretty. And and it can be awful. When Connie Duncan ran for the school board, I was one of the people who helped talk her into running for the school board. And she agonized over it for a couple of months and then finally decided to do it. And within a month was when that purple penguins controversy came out. And people started beating up on her for the purple penguins thing. And I went to her and I said, Connie, I didn't know this was going to happen. I'm sorry I talked you into running. If you want to, you can back out. And she said, back out? Are you crazy? That just makes me want to fight for it more. That's part of it. If you're gonna be a leader, then you better damn well fight. One time when I was president of the school board, Phil Sco, who was superintendent, and I got in an argument about something. Don't even remember what it was. He had a circular table in his office, and he and I got into an actual fist fight. Now he was bigger than I was, so he was winning, but we grabbed each other's ties and we were pulling each other around the table. And we got done, and he went over and took out a piece of paper and started writing on it. And I said, what are you doing? And he said, well, when the superintendent gets into a fight with the school board president, usually he'd better resign. And I said, well, hell no. He said, you want a superintendent who's willing to draw a line in the sand and fight for it. And you're that guy. It just happens that you and I are on opposite sides this time. So you want a fighter. That's one of the things I like about Steve Joel. And one of the reasons I was excited to have him be our new superintendent. When the INS came in and took all these little kids' parents and stuck them in jail, and he wound up with 200 and some little kids, kindergartners.
And this is before.
This was before he was here. This is when he was in Grand Island. He dug in and he found places for them to sleep. He found food for them to eat, and he went and fought the federal government and INS. Made the front page of the New York Times and the Wall Street Journal and the Washington Post. That's the kind of guy you want as a leader, a fighter also. So I guess we're making a list of things. You want a servant who's willing to fight and not give up and is willing to take the crap that you got to take if you're going to be a leader. And boy, I'll tell you what, you know, right now, our school board, well, never, you don't get paid anything for being on the school board. And they're taking an enormous amount of crap for all kinds of things, for this critical race theory or whatever the hell that is, which we don't teach, for masks, which are mandated by somebody other than them. You know, they're just trying to do what's right. They're trying to do what's best for the town, to leave the town a better place than they found it. We have an incredible school board right now, and they're getting beat up. So you'd better be willing to be a fighter. Better be willing to be a servant, and you better be willing to take it, because you're going to have to take it.
So, I mean, that brings us to a good point, though. So, I mean, were you and Phil able to work together after that? Like, when
Oh
you've
my
got a
God, yes.
vision that
Phil,
conflicts with other people, how do you bring them along, or how do you reconcile that?
well, I've always said, and I believe to this day, that Phil Sco is the best superintendent in the United States for a lot of reasons. His best idea. Now, one of the things that Vance Rogers taught me, he said, every 10 years, you want to turn over a CEO. They shouldn't be there longer than 10 years, because the CEO has one big idea and they come in and they implement that big idea, and then it's time for them to go away and somebody else come in and implement their big idea. Well, Phil had been there a while, and I was trying to figure out what his big idea was, and I finally figured it out. His big idea was to create an environment in which other people's big ideas could flourish. Incredible. What an incredible big idea. And it has legs. Now, another one of his big ideas was he noticed that after a school district reached 20,000 kids and before it hit 30, they usually fell apart. And if you look at school districts around the country, there are no school districts that are more than 30,000, which are not a disaster, except for Lincoln. And the reason is that at that time, Kathy Petch was president of the school board, and she and Phil started the site-based learning thing, which basically took the governance of our schools away from the school board and the central administration and put it at the school level, so that each school can do what they need to do to serve the population that they're serving, rather than trying to come up with one solution that fits rich schools and poor schools. What a great idea. So yeah. Phil, the trick and the hard part is to bring people along, because if you have a great idea and you turn around and nobody's following you, then you're not a leader. And it's like Phil said, part of my problem always was that I was asking people to jump off one roof without even being able to see the other roof. And so, yeah, you have to also be able to bring people along, and you have to be able to explain your vision well enough that they'll follow you.
So, how did you learn how to do that? Because it sounds like that didn't come naturally to you, that you had to go back and learn it.
I don't know that I ever learned it. I'm lucky in that my business partner, who is now my second wife, I call her my trophy wife, Barb Derrick, had a number of jobs in our partnership. And one of her jobs was to explain what I was trying to say to other people so that they could understand it. She is an incredible editor. And so that's one way it worked. And another way that it worked is she would slap me on the face and say, "Doug, you're not making sense. Start over again." And so I was surrounded by people who were able to see what I thought and find ways to explain it to other people so that they could understand it. I don't know that I ever was very good at that. It's part of the problem with being a geek and a nerd. You live in a different world.
Yeah. Well, what's one of your leadership failures that you bear with you, and then how did you get past that?
Well, wow, there's an interesting question. A leadership failure, and how do you get past that? A leadership failure, and how do you get past that? I don't mean to be arrogant, but I don't know that I had any real failures. I've been exceedingly lucky in that I've just found incredible people to work with, over and over and over again. One of my one of my buddies was Jim Gordon, who just died. And Jim was responsible for, as much as anybody, for hiring John Chapo, who is our current leader of our zoo.
Mm-hmm.
And, that, hiring somebody new is always dodgy. But man, what a great hire that was. And how lucky we were. And I happened to be on the board when John was hired too. I think one of the reasons that we rarely failed is that I recognized that my own taste was not what everybody else's taste was. So I always trusted the research. For instance, when we did the first Parks and Trails bond issue, we did research and it showed that it wasn't going to pass. And it showed, in order to make it pass, the things that we had to do. And basically, it was to take the focus away from the children's zoo, where the focus was, and put it on the trails. And so that's what we did. And Jim Gordon, again, co-chaired that bond issue, and we passed it. And when it passed 76-24. I think that's still the biggest win ever. And look what we got for that. We got this incredible trails network. You could make an argument that Jim Gordon was president, was the father of our trails. And also helping run that bond issue, we did the research, but helping run it was Bart Lewis, who was an incredible genius and a great explainer of things. And, he's also a gamer. In fact, he is a chess master, and is one of the things he's famous for is he was the last person to beat Bobby Fischer before Bobby Fischer went off to play Spassky in Iceland. And Jim Gordon, Bart Lewis and I played a lot of games together, and playing those games together makes you treat things like elections as games. As good as well as I can figure out, we win sometimes something in the neighborhood of 85%, 90% of the time that we've run campaigns, we've won. And we've run at this point over 150 campaigns. So, but again, I think it's the reason we win is because I don't trust my own taste. And so I go with the research, and the research never lies. You do a poll, you find out what people want, you find a way of presenting what you're trying to do in that way, and finding good people to do it. Not just here. There are communities, Ord, Nebraska, for instance, is a community that can do anything. And it's partly because of the leadership they have. They have a guy there named Bob Stoll, who's a lawyer. Man, he can do anything. There are other communities. Lexington has great leaders. Broken Bow, just St. Paul, great little towns with leaders that do things over and over again. And then there are other little towns that can't do crap because they don't have good leaders. So the other thing is you get lucky in finding people who are good leaders and then doing the right thing, whether you believe in it or not. Like I believed in the children's zoo. I didn't think that the trails were the issue in that case, but they were,
Okay, so that's an interesting example. You were in Leadership Lincoln Fellows 5,
Yep.
fifth class. Leadership Lincoln did. Jim was in Fellows 3. John Breslow was in an early Leadership Lincoln class also.
He was in 1, and he was the treasurer of that campaign.
So do you think that Leadership Lincoln plays a role in helping to network between leaders to get stuff done? I think that's something that Leadership Lincoln does, and I always think of that campaign.
Oh yeah, there's a lot of, the first thing I tell people when they're thinking about running for office is get into Leadership Lincoln, because it gives you a core group of people who will help you. And you get to know people, whether they're Republicans, Democrats, liberals, conservatives, they get to know you for who you are. And so in my campaign, I had people on both sides of the aisle helping me. And yeah, I think Leadership Lincoln is an incredible vehicle for training leaders and for giving people the resources that they need to be successful as leaders. And that's a good example. Yeah, Breslow, Gordon, me, all in that same thing. And there were other people too, but those were three of the people in the inner core group. Yep.
Excellent. So, and you are also, and we haven't talked about this at all yet. We only have like 5 minutes left, but you
Okay,
also
good.
coached soccer for a long time.
25 years.
In what ways did coaching soccer help you in other ways that you led in the community, whether that's serving on a board or on the school board as an elected official?
Well, I started coaching soccer when you were like in first grade or something like that. And it was because your mom was worried that I wasn't spending enough time with my kids. And so she said, you got to put them on your calendar. I said, that's kind of cold. And she said, well, if you don't put them on your calendar, you're not going to spend time with them. And so I started coaching. And and I coached club teams. I coached a couple of select teams, but I didn't like it. I like coaching club teams. I like getting a bunch of people together who would stay together from kindergarten all the way through high school and work together. And, you know, as you got to see, again, people working together. And sports are a tremendous vehicle. And I coached women's soccer, girls soccer, back before that was something. And it was just interesting to see the young women who played soccer for me go on and become leaders, and they all have. And it's because it teaches teamwork. And it's like Brad said one time, he played guard, and another one of my best friends played tackle next to him, Steve Hamilton. And he says, you know, if Steve misses his block, I don't just stand there and say, Steve, you missed your block. I try to pick it up. And that's what teamwork is. You know, you don't point out somebody else's failings. You try to pick it up, try to pick up the block. And certainly that's what soccer did. Then the other thing that I did that helped me as a leader is I taught guitar, and I was a terrible guitar player. So the way I was able to teach guitar was I broke it down into tiny little steps so that I could understand it. And that's part of it is communications. If you break things down into tiny little steps so that you can understand it, especially if you're not any good at it, then other people can understand it too. So that also contributed. Yep. And I'm
Excellent.
so proud of you, Brendan. You've turned out to be a great leader. And I'm so proud that you, oh, look at you blush. I'm so proud of you doing the job that you're doing of Leadership Lincoln, because I do think Leadership Lincoln is tremendously important to Lincoln.
I think so too. And thanks for being my first interview. We're hitting a 12:30 moment. So
Guinea
it's
pig.
been great to have you be my guinea pig to see how this is going to work. But this is something we're going to do throughout this next year and see how it goes. At the beginning of the week, we're going to do Lincoln leaders, just a half-hour interview, brief conversation with folks like my dad, Doug. And at the end of the week, we're going to do community conversations with businesses, nonprofits, organizations in Lincoln to do kind of check-ins on them. We started that at the beginning of the pandemic, just to kind of make sure that people's stories were getting out there. So if there were people that wanted to help folks, that they could. And that just kind of continues. So this Friday, we're going to be talking with Michael Reinmiller, who's going to be talking about Lincoln's Little Free Pantries, which is an idea that he brought to Lincoln, and it's just really exploded across the community. So that'll be fun. Yep.
One last thing before we go, and I meant to say this earlier, and I apologize. And it's something that I learned from Kathy Petch, and is maybe the most important thing. And she taught me. She said, "Don't choose your allies for their politics, because their politics are going to change from item to item. Choose it for their style, because their style is always going to be the same." So, for my ending, Vance Rogers always said, "Stick with threes." People can remember three things. All right, leadership. Be a servant. Choose your allies for their style. And always try to make it better, not political.
Yeah.
They're my three things.
Well, thanks for joining us today.
Thank you for asking me. I enjoy being a guinea pig for you every time, Brendan.
Excellent. All right. Thanks so much.
Take care.